Hi, mystery writers. Today I wanted to talk about pacing in your mystery, and we'll look at 7 ways to pace your mystery novel to keep that tension going and keep um, readers turning the pages. Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? So pacing really helps sustain that tension in your story, and it guides how your reader feels as they read your mystery at every page. So, skilled pacing sustains reader interest from the beginning right up to the end of your story. All right. And so, um, just some suggestions about how this works. If you have too much action scene after scene, your reader's going to get tired. I know putting in all the action feels like you're generating interest, but your reader needs emotional breaks. They need times when things slow down between the action scenes. So, and then on the other hand, passages filled with narrative description or your protagonist thinking um, can feel boring if you don't spice those up with some action around those slower scenes. So, balancing between action, narrative description, dialogue, and contemplation isn't as difficult as it may seem. You just need to take some control. Plus, you want to think about this is in the editing stage. You want to think about clunky language or poor dialogue and um, badly conceived scenes that take your reader out of the story. Um, Pace is what keeps them in your story and keeps them interested. So let's look at some ways that you can craft your mystery story to sustain that pace and maintain the reader interest. And the first thing is what I mentioned before is alternate active and reactive scenes. So you control the pace for your reader by balancing as action scenes with reflective and internal moments. And you give your reader excitement and then recovery. And you're creating momentum in your story. You can use the quieter scenes to share relationship details or your character's thoughts and memories, and they can actually take a break from sleuthing. uh, and these scenes give the readers a chance to orient themselves in the story and process their reactions. They're really important. Um, for example, James Lee Burke since Dave Robichaux fishing between those big exciting moments. So you can do the same thing with your character because the balance between action and reflection keeps your reader from tedium or overwhelm. Um, Too much of the same pace and your reader loses interest. So you want to balance and alternate between active and reactive scenes. The purpose of each scene is to move the story forward. We can't forget that, right? So, beginning writers often wrestle with scenes filled with description or backstory because they feel the reader needs to know everything. But what you want to do is move the story forward, and it's very easy to do with alternating active and reactive scenes. Um, it can feel very formulaic if if you think about it, but what it does is it really controls the pacing for the reader. So let's take a look at the difference between the active scene and the reactive scene. Because the setup is very similar, just a little bit of twist. Okay, with the action scene, you have the goal, the conflict, and then the disaster, something happens at the end, um, and that moves the story forward. And then in the reactive scene or the sequel scene, there's a reaction to what happened in that action scene, and then there's some kind of dilemma. Your character has to make a choice, um, and then at the end they make a decision. They make a choice between whatever those choices were, and go on to take action. And that's pretty much how it goes: goal, conflict, disaster, reaction, dilemma, decision. Um, and once again, you build the tension by escalating the conflict and raising the stakes, but you keep that scene alternation sequence going. And that's going to give your readers excitement and then a little breather to process what's going on in your story. Okay, number two with pacing is planning your story. A mystery is plot driven, and you're leading from the crime to the discovery of the villain. And throughout your story, you plant clues and introduce suspects. And planning helps you space the active and reactive scenes as they lead to the next major plot point in your mystery, and you'll avoid piling on action without giving your reader that breathing space. Um, and then something for pantsers, people who write in discovery mode, you can use the plotting sequences to arrange what you've written, like in your editing stage when you finish that first draft that just like was total discovery. You can now take those scenes and arrange them so you still have the alternating sequences for your readers. Okay, so one of the things that you can use is language. Language helps pace your story. Maybe your choice of language can speed up or slow down your story. And dialogue and action speed things up, and the paragraphs are short. And visually on the page, the reader sees a lot of white space on the page and reads down. It's like getting them going. It's action, action, action. And descriptive passages tend to slow down the story. And if you need narrative description, you can break up that narrative text into short paragraphs rather than long passages. It's that breakup of short paragraphs makes it easier for your reader to follow through. It's just more challenging for your reader to read long, long paragraphs. All right. These shorter passages will help your reader keep going down the page, as it were. Um, you can break up long passages with short dialogue, and even a brief exchange will help with the pace. On the other hand, if you have a long section of dialogue, insert a brief narrative descriptions like what the characters see or how the weather affects their action. And you'll keep the reader grounded in time and space at the same time as your characters are talking back and forth. Uh, and then at the paragraph level, you can vary your sentence length. You can have short sentences and long sentences. Um, long sentence, just like big narrative description, a long sentence slows the reader down. Short sentences keep the reader going. So you want short sentences in your action scenes. All right. And then um, another element of pacing is conflict. To create successful conflict in your story, your reader must be invested in your character. We've talked about this before. When readers care about your character, they care about the conflict. So, um, early on, introduce your reader to your character's vulnerability and to their desire. So setting up this contrast introduces tension and prepares your reader for any obstacles confronting your character later in the story. And each subsequent conflict, whether large or small, tests your character's strengths and weaknesses. And as you introduce your character trait, opinion, and response, you give your reader more opportunity to care. So you're building both things at the same time. You're increasing the reader's caring about the character, and you're also increasing how they are invested in the conflict. So save the fight scenes and battles for later in your story, and first give your reader moments to empathize and care for your hero or heroine. And then, of course, as you're pacing your novel, you want to raise the stakes. So as your story progresses, each action that your character takes has greater significance. There are bigger consequences. Also, along with those character traits, your protagonist needs that goal, that one goal. And for us as mystery writers, the major goal, of course, is identifying and exposing that villain. And the reader needs to know the consequences of not reaching the goal. And this is something I personally find challenging for me when I'm writing my story. Of course, my detective wants to discover the villain, um, and so I need to come up with ways where the consequences really impact my character. Uh, But along the way, you need to clarify what the stakes are if your sleuth fails. Okay, and as your sleuth tries to solve that mystery puzzle, smaller goals and accompanying stakes help you build conflict and tension in that long middle part of your story. And here's where you make the situation go from bad to worse. Your character makes some wrong decisions. They don't know at the time that they're wrong. They think they're right. But the consequences are that everything is even more messed up than it was before. And just to add complication, what if your character gets what they want, but getting what they want puts them in even worse position than they were before? So you can take those positives and those negatives and still make the and still raise the stakes, as it were. And you can also bump up the stakes by adding a ticking clock. Your sleuth must solve the crime before a certain time. And for an amateur sleuth, for example, you can invent a deadline related to their personal life. They're leaving on vacation with their best friend or whatever you want to put in there. So you need to be careful with law enforcement professionals and a ticking clock. For instance, a homicide detective would not take on a case 1 month before retirement. So make sure that your stakes are realistic. Um, anyway, you want those stakes because they build tension. And when your protagonist meets an obstacle and the reader knows the consequences of failure, the reader becomes more emotionally invested in the scene. So, another thing that you want to do with pacing is to space your clues. We all have clues that help our detective and the reader, try to figure out the puzzle. So, control the information you reveal to the reader also creates suspense. And how much you reveal and when you reveal it will keep your reader guessing until you plant the next clue. All right, so just like the incremental steps to raise the stakes, drip your clues. Don't have them all right at the beginning. Make sure you keep adding clues as your story goes along. Um, plant a clue in an action scene to help hide them, or emphasize a clue in a sequel scene to create a false trail or a red herring. You get to play with your clues a lot. So each clue is a component that builds on the question of who that culprit could be. And those clues carry the reader through each chapter and sustain interest by raising questions. Always want to raise questions for our mystery readers. Um, Another thing you can do to help you with pacing is to read your mystery out loud. Put yourself in the reader's place and notice how you feel as you read each scene, and pay attention to how the sentences flow. This is a really good way to catch the language of pacing. Uh, do you find places where it slows down, or do you build momentum? And does each chapter raise a new question at the end? All of these things you can are easy to catch. It's something about reading it out loud really gives you a whole new perspective on your writing. So, those are some tips about pacing, because pacing is so uh, what's the word? It's so important. I'm sorry, I'm blanking using a bland word, but pacing is just crucial to keeping your reader interested in your story, and your your writing is the vehicle for your reader to work their way through your mystery. So pacing helps them move forward and take quick breathers as they plunge ahead to the next action. From the murder to the final reveal, your pacing sustains interest, builds tension, and builds reader interest. The mystery genre is all about creating puzzle pieces that at one point don't seem to fit, but fall into place as your sleuth puts everything in order. So, novel pacing can be one of the biggest challenges for beginning writers, and these guidelines can seem simple. Um, Short and long sequences, action and dialogue, conflict and stakes, alternating scenes. But master writers follow these same guidelines. Okay, I hope that helps, and helps you understand how to manage the pacing so that you sustain interest for your readers. Okay, I'd love your comments, so put them below and keep writing, and I will see you next week.